2025, and like in the previous four, we have today once again a brilliant faculty like K Pradhvik ji. Pradeep Kapasi ji is known to many of us, but then it's a formality. I will have to introduce him to all of you as a backbone and a pillar of AIFTP. He has been always helpful to AIFTP, PTC, PTAS, and what many. To name the few, I said this. But then he has been of immense help to us, and I welcome him. He has been author of so many publications. He has been associated with CTC, PCAS. He is the past president of PCAS, and we know we have been very familiar with AIFTP, with Pradeep Kapasi sir. It is that with that informal introduction, I hand over the floor to you. It's entirely yours, sir. Please. Go ahead, Pradeep Kapasi.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Good evening. Samir Bhai, the president of an eminent association, AIFTP. My seniors and the past presidents, esteemed past presidents, Mr. Purohit and Mr. Jain. It's wonderful to be back with you, after some time. So it's my pleasure on being invited, and I congratulate you on conceiving a very wonderful webinar on a subject of topical importance. It's so nicely structured. All minute details have been taken care of, and the eminent faculties you have been able to capture and make them agree to be a part of this webinar talks a lot about the Federation and the yeoman work. I've been associated with Federation for last 30 years, perhaps much more than that also. And it has always been a wonderful journey, being a part of the journal, then being a part of the seminar conferences, and perhaps sometimes outstation tours also. So, and over a period, a kind of a bond which has developed is something which I'll cherish for a long time to come hereafter. So today, my scope of my talk, as has been informed to you by the President, is to cover the provisions of the income tax bill in relation to income from house property and tax deduction at source and tax collection at source. I understand, as I have talked with the chairman, Mr. Hemani Tusarbhai, that yes, that the scope would be to highlight those provisions which are materially different than our understanding of such provisions under the Income Tax Act. So therefore, I would not be repeating those provisions which have already been retained from Income Tax Act into the Income Tax Bill. So what one would be doing would be to highlight only those differences, the implications of such differences, and also, in time permitting, would also take you through the comparative tables. And before that, I would also explain to you that what are the important fundamental concepts of the particular heads of income or the TDS or TCS, and whether there is any change in relation to that or not. So with this limited introduction, permit me to share the PowerPoint presentation with you. Yes. Is the PowerPoint visible for all of you? Yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. The first important difference which has been made is in relation to Section 22, which is now rechristened as Clause 22. We will, for convenience, refer to till the time the income tax bill is enacted as the relevant part as the clauses, and the sections would be attributed to the Income Tax Act. So this will make the discussion simpler and will not refer to sections. So clause 22 is the relevant clause of the income tax bill of 2025, which makes a material change as compared to the Income Tax Act in section 22. The concept here is that the exemption is provided in relation to taxation of a notional income where a particular house property, which includes of course commercial property owned by an assessee, is used and occupied for the purposes of business. So when a person owner is able to explain, demonstrate, establish that a particular house property was used for the purposes of business, then in such a case, there would be no notional income taxation. This is the position as on today. Now, how does it flow out of the Income Tax Act? In Income Tax Act, it is so provided that a house property which an owner may occupy for the purposes of business, may occupy for the purpose of his business, So therefore, the meaning so far which has been understood is that if an owner occupies the house property for the purposes of business, then in such case, there is an exemption from income tax in relation to income from house property. Now, the material change which has been made in the wording is that now it has been provided that the exemption is available in respect of a property as is occupied by the assessee for his business. So one would see that now the emphasis on the real occupation. Emphasis number one. And the second is that that occupation should be for his business and not anybody else's business, not necessarily the business of the firm wherein he is a partner, business of the company wherein he is a shareholder or a director. Now so twin new requirements is that the occupation is essential. If it is intended to be occupied, if it is a passive user, that would not be possible. Now the effect therefore of the change in income tax bill, which will be effective from tax year 26-27, which in loose terms would be assessment year 27-28. As you all have been told so far, I am sure that the concept of assessment year has been given a go by. Now it will be tax year, and tax year would be largely equivalent to the financial year. So the material change which has been sought to be made for ensuring the exemption from the notional income tax is that the person must be actually occupying the premises. So actual user is necessary as against passive user. A ready to use may not necessarily now qualify for exclusion from clause 20 for the taxation of IFHP. The other difference which is sought to be made is that the use should be for his business, the owner's business. And if the business is that of his firm or that of a company, then in such case, there could be a serious difficulty, or I would say there would be a disentitlement because of an express language of the first listing. This is the first difference which we have highlighted. The second one is in relation to letting of property. When a property is let out, the amount of rent which is received, becomes the basis for the purposes of calculating the income from house property. Now, so how do you quantify this particular thing? Let us understand under the present prescription, under section 23 clause B of the Income Tax Act, the property or any part of the property is let. The language used is the property or any part of the property is let. As against that, in the income tax bill, the wordings are the property or any part of property it is let in the normal course in the normal course. So these new things which is presented to you in this PowerPoint in the bold letters is in the normal course. So if there is a stray transaction of a letting which is not considered to be in the normal course, then in such case, I am afraid that the quantification of the annual value would be different. Where it is done in the normal course, the amount which is actually received will alone be annual value. As against that, if it is not in the normal course, if it is a stray letting, an irregular letting, then in such case the fair market value, fair rental value of the property would be the one which would be the amount which would be quantified as the letting value or annual value, and the taxation would be worked accordingly. To give you an example is that if you have under the income tax bill, when it comes into operation is when it is enacted is, if you have let out a property in the normal course and that letting out was for say 4 months only, then in such case the amount of rent which you have actually received, even if it was less than the fair rental value, if the going rate of fair rental value was a lakh of rupees per month, and you had received just 40,000 rupees per month, but it was in the normal cost, then in that case, the amount which has been actually received, that is 40,000 rupees into 4 months, that is 1,60,000, will alone be considered as your annual value, and you will be required to pay tax as computed on such amount after deducting certain permissible deductions. As against that, if it is not in the normal course, then the fair rental value of 12 lakh of rupees would alone be liable to be taxed, which will be much higher. So this is an important second difference which we have examined. The next is about the vacancy allowance and the actual rent received. Now this also there is a material difference, in the Income Tax Act and the Income Tax Bill. Presently, if a house is vacant for the whole of the year, then you get 100% vacancy allowance, no amount is deductible. If it was vacant for a part of the year, then in such case the amount which you had received actually what was alone required to be offered for the tax, meaning thereby for the balance months for which the property was vacant, that period would not be considered to be liable for the purposes of tax. Now let us see the play of the words here. In the Income Tax Act, as is presently available, only if we are allowed this vacancy allowance, provided the shortfall between the fair rental value and the actual rent received is attributable to vacancy. So there must be a real vacancy, and if there is no vacancy, then in such case, and vacancy would be the one which is attributed, wherein it was for the part of the year and not for the whole of the year. Then in that case, the shortfall would be ignored, and only amount which is actually received would alone be taxed. If the assessee is able to establish that the shortfall was on account of vacancy. Now you see the change in income tax bill, which is progressive and beneficial. The wordings which are used now is that actual rent alone will be liable to be taxed irrespective of whether shortfall is only on account of vacancy or for any other reasons. So even if the shortfall is for any other reason, say market is bad, or you had not been able to get the fair rental value, and there could be many other reasons. You just could not let it out also. Then in such case, the amount actually received only will be considered as the one representing the annual value. And therefore this is an important change, whereunder it is no more now necessary for the assessee to establish that the property was vacant and therefore he did not or could not receive the rent which he was otherwise eligible to. So earlier it was restricted to vacancy only, Now the reason for not receiving rent could be anything. So this is a material third change. Moving forward is uh, yes. Moving forward is about a standard deduction. All of us are aware that that an owner in computing the income from house property is eligible to claim a standard deduction of 30% of the net annual value. Annual value as reduced by the municipal taxes and service taxes. It is on this amount, that is net annual adjusted value, that an assessee gets a deduction of 30%. Am I clear? Yes. So if that is so, that is the present prescription under the Income Tax Act. The income tax bill also requires you to reduce the annual value by the taxes paid. Taxes paid. It requires you to do so, but the material difference is that the standard deduction is provided with reference to the annual value determined before deduction of municipal taxes or service taxes, sewerage taxes, halal coal taxes, and such other taxes. So this is actually expanding the base for the calculation of standard deduction at the rate of 30%. So this is a material change. I do not know whether this is a slip or an intended thing, but as the language is very clear, clause 22(1) is the basis on which the deduction is given. So under 22(1), you get a deduction with reference to annual value under 21(1) and not with reference to 22(2) value, which is a value reduced after reducing it by municipal taxes. The other difference which is they also made is that the presently it is such municipal taxes and service taxes which are actually paid that are allowed to be deducted from the fair rental value or the rent received. As against that, in the income tax bill, there is no such prescription that the amount should actually be paid. What is important is the amount of municipal tax, whether paid or payable, amount of other taxes, whether paid or payable. That is the way one would look at this, and this is the fourth change which we have noted. Carrying it further now, the fifth major thing is that presently, if you have borrowed funds for purchase of the house property or the construction of a house property, and that interest which has been paid on such borrowing before the date of possession, before the date of occupation of such house, that period, that interest which you have paid is not allowed as a deduction, but it is amortized. The deduction is allowable, but is not in the year of occupation. And before occupation, there is no income taxation at all, because income could be taxed only when the property is occupiable. So this interest which has been paid during, which is a pre-construction period, pre-acquisition period, that presently the law provides you a deduction under 24 subclause B. That provides you deduction under 24 subclause B in full, but in 5 annual equal installments. 5 annual equal installments, and such amount of interest is allowed to be deducted against the income from let out property, as also against income from self-occupied property. Against income from let out property and also against income from self-occupied property. The change which has been made in transition to the income tax bill is that such a deduction now would be available only in computing the income, notional income, in respect of a self-occupied property, subject to a cap of rupees 2 lakh. And so this is a material difference which can hit many people, that those who have let out the property and are in receipt of rent, but the interest which they seek to claim is a pre-construction period interest, then that interest, I'm afraid, would not now, under the bill from TY's 26-27, 2026-27, would not be eligible for deduction unless the parliament changes its mind. Now, these are the 5 important material differences which I could think of on a prospectus reading of the income tax bill and comparing the same with the Income Tax Act. So what in effect one derives is that all other important concepts of taxation of income tax, taxation of an income from house property, all other important concepts would be retained. And what are they? The first one is charge. The charge is in respect of a rent actually received or a notional income. Either ways, the charge is definitive. Secondly, the charge is in respect of a person who is the owner of a house property, and which includes even a deemed owner of a house property. If you are not the owner of a house property, then in that case the charge does not apply to this. This is the position which continues to that. I'm just highlighting what are the provisions. Computation provisions are materially the same, that you know that you need to determine the annual value. From that you are given a deduction on account of the municipal taxes. You are given a deduction on account of other taxes attributable to occupation of the house property. Then you are given a deduction in respect of interest. You are given a deduction in respect of vacancy allowance. You are given a deduction in respect of the unrealized rent also. So this scheme of computation largely with deductions remains same. The point of taxation would be annually, irrespective of whether you have been able to realize the rent or you have not been able to realize the rent. The point of taxation would be with reference to the annual year ending in which you have been an owner of the house property whose income is taxable under the head income from house property. The rate of taxation is same. There is no special rate of taxation. It will be an income which will be aggregated with your other income from other heads, will constitute part of the total income and will be subjected to the regular income tax, will be subjected to surcharge, and both of which together would be subjected to education cess also. There are some exemptions, like, that in case, see, if you are not otherwise the owner of the property, then in that case, or if you are the owner of a property which is self-occupied, then there is an exemption. In case where if the property is used for the purposes of business, then there is exemption. These are far and few exemptions which are ingrained into the concept in this chapter itself. There are restrictive conditions which continue to be the same. Deeming fictions that if you are a owner of the house property which is owned by, if you are occupying a house property which is owned by a society or a corporate body, even in such case you will be considered to be a deemed owner. A co-owner also is considered to be an owner. If you are a lessee under a lease deed whose period of lease is exceeding 12 years, then in such case also you would be considered to be a deemed owner and you would be subjected to notional income taxation under the head IFHP. Open issues like, how vacancy allowance would be granted, in what circumstances, the issues relating to stock in trade. For the first 2 years, you are exempt from paying taxes on notional income, and thereafter, if you have been holding the house properties as stock in trade after the end of 2 years, then you will continue to pay the taxes. But the debate is that when you are using it for the purposes of business, holding the asset as stock in trade is a user for the purposes of business. And we have a Gujarat High Court in Neha Builders case, which says that in such case, the provisions of Section 28 would apply. Then the head of taxation, the debate of head of taxation would also continue in as much as that whether the particular income is subjected to tax under the head income from house property or under the head profits and gains of business or profession. We have the famous case of Chennai properties, wherein you are constructively engaged in the business of renting property. Then the income thereof would be taxed under the head income from business and not income from house property. As against that, you have a famous decision in the case of Raj Dadarkar, wherein Supreme Court stated that in the case of individual not engaged necessarily in the business, then in such case the income has to be taxed under the head income from house property. So these few debates about vacancy, about head of income, all of them would continue to operate and there is no material change which is sought to be made in real from transition from act to bill. The precedents, that is the law which is supplied by the courts, will continue to bind you, will continue to apply. All these famous decisions will be relevant, which have been delivered in the context of all this, what is considered as an occupation. All these top typographic decisions, Mona Subarau's decision, and of course, as I said, Chennai properties and such other decisions will continue to be relevant for the purposes of our discussion. With that, permit me to move to the provisions relating to tax deduction at source and tax collection at source. Let me present the overview of the income tax bill. And what is that? Please consider in this. That the important change which is being made is that presently, as I could count, in the Income Tax Act, there are about 42 provisions, different sections commencing from 192 and ending with 196D. There are about 42 provisions which provide for taxation in respect of different payments. A payer is presently required to deduct tax at source while making such payments. And there are about 42 instances which is spread all over the chapter 17, capital B. As against that, now what is provided is that most of these provisions, 42 provisions, have been consolidated in one section 393 largely, and there are one or two other sections, but that is what is 392 clause 393 of the bill. That is one important thing which has happened. Secondly, that instead of providing or writing the provisions in the sentence format, now all these 42 provisions are tabulated. In as much as the tables as rows and columns, whereunder you have been told that which is the particular payment which is to be made. You have been told that who is the payer, who is the payee. You have been told that what is the threshold which is up to which the amount is not deductible. You have been told what is the rate of tax at which the tax is to be deducted. You have also been told about the time at which the amount is to be deducted. And of course, I said that in what circumstances provisions would not apply and the payment would be exempt from these. So in few many tables, this has been done. Now, while providing this, the income tax bill seeks to classify the payments into different things. Major is three major. One is payments made to residents are tabulated in one class. Payments made to non-residents are tabulated in another class. And payments made to resident and non-resident where any one of them is liable to tax deduction at source are classified as the third class, in respect of which also. So there are three classes in respect of which the tax is required to be deducted. Then it has also been provided that there are few payments in respect of which the tax may not be deducted at source if the payee furnishes a declaration stating giving details of his income, his PAN, and such other prescribed details. Then on receipt of that declaration, as is presently possible, that this is separately tabulated, that no tax would be deducted on receipt of a declaration within the confined corners of the prescription. Then it is also provided that certain specified transactions that would attract TDS, that also has been classified in this table. Moving further, now in this case, before seeing the changes, let us see what are the important concepts and what are the differences which are sought to be made. One is that there is presently in the Act, there is a parallel charge. That tax deduction at source is not the only method or the mode of collecting taxes. That in case, if a person has not deducted tax at source, or if he has no credit for TDS, the tax would still be payable by way of advance tax or by way of a self-assessment tax. So therefore, TDS provisions continue to be provisions which are parallel provisions, and they are not substitution for the payment of tax which is charged under Section 4 of the Income Tax Act presently. This concept also continues. Then about point of deduction, point collection, the concept continues to be that at the earliest point of time, that is on payment or credit. On payment or credit, whichever is earlier. And the credit to suspense account also is considered to be a credit, and that will activate the liability to deduct tax. In the transition to bill, what is materially changed in this concept is that even where instead of crediting an amount to a suspense account or the account of the payee, if you credit a third account, say for matter, if you credit a provision for expenses account or some other obscure account, then in such case also now there will be a liability under the income tax bill to deduct tax at source. So this is a material change which is an important concept which is happening in the transition. Then the provision for the rate of deduction, as one would see that in respect of about 17 cases, the rates has been reduced. The table very clearly provides that what is the threshold. In some cases, the threshold is reduced. In some cases, the rate is reduced. But the concept is that the rate is provided. The rate is provided for. So this is the next important concept. Then there are higher rate of cases. Presently, the Income Tax Act provides that in case if the payee does not have a PAN or the payee is a non-filer, then in such case a higher rate of tax is to be deducted by the payer. And if he fails to do so, then in that case he is made liable for the consequences. Now in the income tax bill, taking a leaf from Finance Act 2025, it has been provided that no higher tax should be deducted, no tax should be deducted at a higher rate by way of a punishment in case of a person who is a non-filer, but the limitation of deducting tax at a higher rate in case of non-PAN cases will continue. Then the other thing is, the next important concept is that you can apply to the AO for a lower deduction of tax or no deduction of tax. No deduction of tax or no collection of tax. But such an application today under the Income Tax Act is possible only under specified provisions of the Income Tax Act. Not all cases are eligible for a lower or no deduction of tax. So this important concept is sought to be changed in the income tax bill. And what is that? It says, income tax bill says that you are now no more permitted to apply for zero deduction or nil deduction under any of the provisions, be that TDS or TDS, be that income from rent or income or payment to or payment from a developer. All these cases now, lower deduction is possible, but no deduction is not possible. The second important change which is sought to be made is that presently you could apply to AO in very limited number of cases for a lower deduction or no deduction of case. As against that, now under any of the provisions of TDS or TCS, a person is entitled to apply for a lower deduction of taxes at source or for a lower collection of taxes. So this is again an important change. Exemptions continue to be those which have been specified, but all of them now are properly tabulated in one provision that is very clearly providing in 396 clause 396, which says there are about 12 classes of cases wherein the person is not required to deduct tax either on account of threshold or on account of the desired exclusion. In both cases,
पूरा जो चेंज किया है एक मिनट बताते हैं।
cases you will not be
पूरा जो नया
required
जो
to this.
डायरेक्ट
The
टैक्स
difference
नया
between
चेंज किया है ना,
residential status, that is
इसका
resident
सेमिनार हो रहा है
and
FTP का।
non-resident and a foreign company, is
आपको
continued
FTP
to be
में
retained and accordingly would be
मेंबर नहीं
taxed.
होते
There is
हैं
no
FTP में, है
material
ना?
difference.
लगता है
In
नहीं
cases where direct double tax avoidance agreements apply, then in that case DTAA will have an overriding impact, and the rate which is prescribed under DTAA will be the one which will apply while deducting the tax at source. It will also be applicable in determining the
Changes जो
character
किया
of
है,
income, in determining whether a particular income is taxable in your country or is taxable in a foreign country. So
डिडक्शन में भी कुछ कुछ चेंज
DTAA,
किया है,
the sum
मतलब
and
यह है कि
substance of it is
जरा
that
कि
it
गलती
will
से हो
override
गया
the
है
provisions of Income
या
Tax Act, including the provisions of
इंटेंशनली है,
393 to
तो वो बाद में पता
396.
चलेगा।
Restrictions and
सभा पे
conditions there are
पूरा है
subject to this. Some of the exemptions are conditional,
जैसे
restricted, in the sense that if I am an
अभी क्या है
individual or an HUF and
कि
I do not wish to deduct tax, then I need
जो
to
डिडक्शन में
satisfy
जाते
the
हैं
government that
तो
yes,
पहले
that I
म्युनिसिपल
was
टैक्स
my
घटाते
account, I
हैं
am not in the
या और
business,
कुछ है
or
घटाते
my
हैं,
accounts in the preceding
सर्विस टैक्स
previous
घटाते
year
हैं,
were not
तब
subjected
30%
to
का
tax
डिडक्शन
audit.
मिलता है।
My turnover
तो
for that
30%
year
स्टैंडर्ड
did not
डिडक्शन जो है,
exceed the prescribed
अभी
limit of
में जो
50
है
lakhs
वो
or
कह रहा है कि
whatever
उसके
the
पहले
1 crore or
मतलब
50
पहले
lakhs
30%
rupees.
घट
As a
जाएगा,
professional, it is
उसके
50
बाद
lakhs
म्युनिसिपल टैक्स और ये घटेगा। तो
moving
यही
further,
है उसका कि
that
दैट इज
there
इंटेंशनली
is a
और बाय
provision
स्लिप ऑफ पे
2011 and 2011A in particular. That
तो इसी तरह से है
it says
चीजें।
that if a person has not deducted tax or after having deducted tax he has
अगर
not
आपके पास
deposited it,
रीजनेबल कॉज है कि
then
आपका
that
रेंट नहीं
person
लगा
is
है
considered to be a person
तो वो डिडक्शन
who
में
is
जाएगा।
deemed
पहले
to be
था ना
in
कि भाई
default.
ड्यून इनकम होगा,
And if
ये
he is
होगा,
deemed to be in default,
मार्केट वैल्यू,
interest is
अब उसको
applicable,
कहता है कि
penal interest
maybe
is applicable, and penalty
सब
is
रीजन और
applicable,
अगर जो
and
है
in some
आपका
cases even
नहीं लग रहा है
punishment, that is
तो वो
prosecution, is
डिडक्शन में
applicable.
उसको क्लेम।
This 201 has a wonderful provision which says that if when you have failed to deduct tax at source or deposit the same after having deducted, but the tax which was not deducted, if it is paid by the payee at the time of filing his return of income, and the income is included in computation of his returned income, total income, then in such case, if such a person furnishes a certificate from his chartered accountant stating that the payee has paid full taxes, then in such case the payer would not be considered as deemed to be in default. This concept, which is a beneficial concept, will continue to apply even under the income tax bill. The concept of deemed income is that only very limited cases the TDS or
तो वही है
TCS
कि
is
अभी तो
liable
समय है,
in respect of
तो
deemed
पूरा
income. What is
फाइनेंशियल में
here
बचा हुआ
is
है, फाइनेंशियल
required
का
is
चीज है तो
that what is
अगर
here
होगा तो फिर
required
अमेंडमेंट
is
करेगा
that the
पार्लियामेंट
amount
को,
must be payable or paid.
क्योंकि एक्ट
And
है ना.
only in such cases there is no concept of deemed income, but for the provisions like grossing up provisions. The grossing up provisions in the context of section 192 and 195A provides that the person who is required to pay the income which is net of tax, then in such case the person will have to carry out a simultaneous equation for deciding the amount on which the tax is required to be deducted. Then the year of credit, the provision similar to 198 and 199
अब तो यही थी,
are
कमलेश
retained
नहीं
in
बोला कि
income
कोई
tax
गेस्ट आने
bill.
वाले हैं, कोई है
Then
नहीं.
in such cases, the year of credit of the tax is deducted would be the year in which the income is offered for the purposes of taxes. Similarly, the amount deducted would be added to your income. Amount deducted would be added to your income, and you would not be able to say that you will pay tax only on the net income. You will not be able to pay tax only on the net income. So these concepts, these are wonderful concepts which have been retained. Payment by payee, I have explained, we have discussed in detail. The provisions relating to penalty are para materia, same, and also the same is in respect of prosecutions. The open issues and debates, what is the time for deduction of tax? Is it on 31st March, that is when you make a provision, or is it at the time of finalizing your books of account, when you are actually
श्रीकांत अग्रवाल
crediting the account, when you finalize the
बोल रहा
account
था
at the
कि
time of getting your accounts audited and filing the
सर
return? Now
मन नहीं
these
कर
are
रहा
the
प्रैक्टिस करने
few
का.
and far-reaching controversies which will continue to haunt the understanding of the tax deduction at source and tax collection at source. The importance of precedents, that is the decided rulings and by the courts, tribunals, Supreme Court, will continue to help us in guiding the future course of action. With this, now we come to the specific changes, which I believe are material, and there are not
मोदी
many.
तो
If we are able to
इनकम टैक्स एक्ट
address
खत्म
them,
करने के
it
लिए
would be
थे.
good. The first change is made in respect of the ESOP, that is employees this ESOP, that is employees security options, which is being provided. So there is a time limit when an ESOP is provided by the employer company. Then
वाईफाई नहीं है
in
ऑफिस
such
में.
case, the deduction is to be made at the earliest point
तो
of
बोला कि हम लोग घर पर ले
these
जाते हैं,
three
यहाँ पे
particular
स्टाफ
events.
सब भी है,
And
सुने
what
सुने
are
है
they?
क्या है,
The first event
लैपटॉप
is
दिए हुए
48
डिपार्टमेंट को
months
घरे पर करते हैं
from
जब
the
तक
end
यहाँ
of the
अपने
tax
करना
year.
है.
Or now it is presently assessment year of allotment of ESOP.
और
So
इसीलिए
if
क्या हो
an
गया है
ESOP has been granted to
कि
me
बहुत सा जो
in
आप कंप्लेन
assessment
करते
year
हैं ग्रीवांस में डालते हैं जो
22-23,
आईटीओ के
then by
थ्रू आता है,
31st March
वो लोग सीधे
2025, I was
जो
required
है
to
उसको
deduct
डिनाई
tax
कर
at
देता है,
source on granting the ESOP.
रिफ्यूज कर देता है.
On
तो
granting the
सीपीसी
ESOP.
भी कहता है
The
कि
other thing was that the
rectification
date
is
when
not
the
allowed as per
assessee,
the
that is the employee,
instruction of
ceased to be in
या
employment.
रिपोर्ट ऑफ
Then in that
एओ,
case, this period of 3
ये वो
years
सीधे
would be
डिनाई कर
reduced
देता है.
to the date on which the assessee has ceased to be in employment. And the third is that even where the assessee continues to be in employment, but he transfers his ESOP, he sells his ESOP, then in that case, the date of deduction by the employer of the tax would be advanced. So the earliest point of the three is the one which is presently provided for the purposes of deduction of tax.
क्या कहाँ क्या
the
करता है, कुछ
change
समझ
which
में
is
नहीं
in the
आता.
transition to bill is that the rest of the two provisions continue, that is that is cessation of employment and or
ESOP
the
क्या हो
transfer
गया?
of ESOP. But the first event, that is 48 months, is now reduced, is expanded to 60 months, is extended to 60 months, meaning thereby there is a higher time permissible, a greater time permissible to the employer. This point of the three is the one which is presently provided for the purposes of deduction of tax. So what has been the change which is in the transition to bill is that the rest of the two provisions continue, limits continue, that is on that is cessation of employment and or the transfer of ESOP. But the first event, that is 48 months, is now reduced, is expanded to 60, is extended to 60 months, meaning thereby there is a higher time permissible, a greater time permissible to the employer for reduction of tax and source. And this will now be 48, 60 months from the end of the tax year and not the end of the assessment year. So this is one significant change which has been made, which is applicable of course to those employers who are in the business of providing ESOP, granting ESOP, not to all employers. The second change which is being made is that in determining the value of ESOP,
अभी देखिए ना जगह जगह
in determining the value of ESOP, now the person, the employer will have
आतंकवाद
to determine
मुर्दाबाद
such
आतंकवाद
value
मुर्दाबाद
as per the
पाकिस्तान
rules which will
जिंदाबाद
be prescribed under the income tax rules 2025 or any
अब कुछ
such
तो है
rules
सलाह कहता है कि
when they are
अपलोड कर दो
prescribed. Presently, of course, there is as far as the
यार
income
भाई
tax
मैं
act
उसको
is
कहता है कि
concerned,
अपलोड कर दो
there is no such rule which
क्या
has
होगा
been
हालांकि
prescribed, and the
बहुत
fair
जगह
market
पकड़
value
रहा
of
है
the ESOP
कुछ
is
स्टेट नहीं
considered
पकड़ता है
to
जैसे
be the one
झारखंड
which is
है
liable
बंगाल
for
है
the purposes of deduction of tax and source. The third which is done in the case of
बिहार
ESOP
में
is that in case where salary is payable in a foreign currency and the employee is granted the ESOP, then in that case, the value of ESOP is first determined under the foreign rates, under the foreign currency, and thereafter it is converted in
इस
the
पर
INR, that is Indian National Rupees, and it is that amount which is subjected to this. Presently, there is no such provision provided in the income tax bill as has been presented to us. So therefore, there is no such provision for conversion. We'll take it with a pinch of salt and hope that that eventually the parliament would provide or the CBDT will provide for such conversion. Ideally, it should be the parliament which should be providing for such conversion. Consolidation provisions, I am taking you back to what we have discussed just to highlight now individually what has happened is 192 and 192A, both dealing with salary and grossing up of salary, is now placed in clause 392, one provision for two provisions. 193 to 196D, which are exactly 40 provisions, 40 provisions are all placed in clause 392 now. They are all placed, as I said, in one provision, all under one umbrella, and they are properly tabulated. So you don't have to hunt too many sections, don't need to jump from one section to another section, 193 to 194A and 194A to 195. No such things, everything is available under one umbrella. Then, inclusive threshold for non-deduction. There are about 12 sections under which presently the income tax is required to be deducted. The threshold where the income tax is not required to be deducted, those thresholds have been increased from say 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, or 20,000 to 50,000, and 50,000 to a lakh of rupees. And not be wasting your time and energy. But it is sufficient that in respect of 12
छोड़ दिए काहे छोड़ दिए कुछ पता नहीं लगा मेरे यहाँ से हट गया अचानक बेटा शायद प्रैक्टिस में आया है रिजालों की तरफ से
It has received the assent of the President of India. Then there is one material change wherein the tax has been significantly lowered.
हम कहते हैं जिनका संबंध था
In
बहुत
another cases,
करते
the rate of tax is not lower. But in this particular case, that is 194 LBC, which is payment of compensation in certain cases. The present rate is 25% for individual and HUF, and for other cases it is 30%. This rate of 25 and 30% is significantly reduced.
वही दूसरा भाई के बड़े भाई का आप ये सर्विस करना बड़ी कॉस्टली चाहिए
Yeah.
सत्रह अठारह हजार बिकली
Weekly.
स्कूल कॉलेज के मित्र कॉलेज में साथ पढ़ा
Sales made in excess of certain values. This provision was considered to be dubious, and therefore it is now provided that this provision is deleted, omitted. This provision is omitted with effect from 1/4/2025, and this provision is now also finding a place in income tax bill of 2025. Carrying this further is that we have already discussed that the non-filers are not now subjected to higher rate of deduction or collection. Even if they are non-filers, only if they do not have PAN, then in such case the difficulty will have to be faced of higher deduction or higher deduction. Then another change which is made is that there is no TDS on cash withdrawal from banks. Under the Income Tax Act, there is a provision that if your cash withdrawal from the bank over a period of year is exceeding the prescribed limit, the bank is required to deduct tax at source. Now that would not be the case. That provision is not finding a place in income tax bill, so which is a salient beneficial provision. Then certificate for lower deduction is possible on all payments, which was earlier possible
हम एक आध बार फोन
on
किए
such provisions which
एडवांस
will be
टैक्स वगैरह
counted on the
के नहीं
figures.
रिस्पॉन्स
Now
आया
it is
फिर मालूम चला
applicable
कि
to
ऐसे
all
ऐसे है
42 provisions.
फिर
So this also is a
उनके
material
कुछ
change.
मामा लोग थे
Moving further to tax
वो
collection
भी
and
डेढ़ में फाइल
source.
कराते थे उसका
Moving
जो भी
further
नहीं
to tax
करना
collection
तो हमको
and
लगा
source.
कि पूरा
That this we have
ग्रुप
said
में जो
that
है
for non-filers also there is no higher TCS, which has already been done in Finance Act 2025. Forest produce is defined by the Finance Act 2025, and the definition so provided is retained. The significant change is that the rate of deduction is now 2.2% from 2.5%. So there is a 1/5 reduction in the rate of deduction. Now, not all produces would be considered as a forest produce. Only such produces which are defined in the definition of forest produce, as is put under the Indian Forest Act of 1927. The material change is that if you are a plucker of the leaves, in the forest, if you are the one who is harvesting the forest produce, then you would be classified as a person who is the manufacturer of the produce, loosely saying. As against that, if you are a trader in the leaves, in the herbs, then you would not be considered to be as a person who is making payment or who is receiving payment, and the tax is required to be collected at source. That provision would not apply. In short, to a person who is a dealer in such produces. Then, as regards the LRS, liberalized remittance schemes, and overseas tour program, the material change which has been made by the Finance Act 2025 and which has now been retained in the finding a place in the bill of 2025 is that earlier, that in respect of LRS, the remittance scheme was of 7 lakhs. Up to 7 lakhs you were exempt. That limit has been increased to 10 lakh of rupees for this overseas tour program also. Second amendment which has been sought to be made is change which is sought to be made. That if you are withdrawing remittances, if you are making remittances out of the borrowed funds for the purposes
अब
of
लगता है
education, and that borrowing is from prescribed financial institutions including
सही और
banks,
प्रैक्टिस में
then in
जो
such
कमा के
case,
धर दिया उसके लिए
NBFC,
कोई बात नहीं।
then in such case, there is no provision for tax collection at source. So in short, what is being provided is that educational loan obtained from financial institution or banks or
मेरा तो
NBFC,
पीपी में
and if it is
एपीपी में हो
remitted in
जाता
foreign currency, then in
पढ़ाया
such
हुआ
case
सब हो
there
गया
is no
एपीपी
tax to be collected at source by the bank or the educational institutions or NBFC. This, as I said, then
जो लिखा
certificate for
है कितने
lower collection is possible in all cases which are governed under the
हमको तो
tax collection at source chapter.
और मार दिया सब जो है सीनियर सीनियर
Well,
सीनियर
these
के
are
नाम
the
पर जो है
tables which are
ढेर जगह से मेरा इससे
comparing, which is now
ये हो
available on
गया
the
सर
net.
आप क्या किया
So I would
ये
not
है
take much of your
ये
time
है
in
तो अपना
relation to
उसका
that. Almost
आप
all
बराबर नजर
provisions
में
of the
रहिएगा तो आपका
income
नंबर
from house property chapter are retained, but they are renumbered
सीनियर है
under
वो
the income tax bill. And the
आईटीबी
material
क्या हुआ
changes which we
आईटीए
have seen
आईटीबी
are the changes
कंपैरिजन
which we have
बिटवीन
discussed,
आईटीए एंड
which we have
आईटीबी
discussed, yes, and highlighted. Those are the only material changes.
190
As against
320
that,
हो गया
as against that,
190 था उसका
when we come
390
to
हो गया
TDS and TCS, once
डायरेक्ट
again,
पेमेंट
all
191 से
45 provisions,
391
42 for deduction or otherwise, and the rest like
इंटरेस्ट ऑन
190,
सिक्योरिटीज 193
197,
था 194
198,
डिविडेंड है
199, 200,
194 इंटरेस्ट फ्रॉम अदर सोर्सेज उसका 393 हो
and
गया
201, 201, 202, 203, all are retained. All are retained, but they have been pre-numbered. So therefore, one is advised to refer to
इनकम
those
पेबल
provisions.
ऑन
There is a long list of provisions, and we may spare our energy,
तो
by
वही होगा
not taking each of them.
टीडीएस
one
का
by
सेक्शन
one,
सब
because
चेंज किया
they are
वन
otherwise
आईटीए
largely the
आईटीबी
same,
है
largely
आईटीबी
the
लगता है कि चेंज जो है
Repeats
न्यू
and savings is something which we are not
रिफिल एंड
discussing,
सेविंग
in the sense that there are about 22 provisions which are retained, from the income tax act.
ये होगा
But
प्रीवियस
those are
वाला जो है
running
जो
through the length and breadth of the
प्रेजेंट
income
में है
tax
और
act,
बी होगा
and
जो
no material change
जो न्यू
which is
एक्ट है
retained in the context of the transition from income tax to income tax bill relating to TDS
किसका?
or TCS. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased
वो तो है
that for once I have been able to complete the things
सेक्शन
within
जो
the
चेंज
time
किया
which
हो
has been
उसमें
prescribed to me.
लेकिन उसमें भी
So
सर्टेन
frankly, I am little
चेंजेस किया है
early,
जो सुने
and
अब
therefore,
उसको
if the chairman
देखना
permits,
पड़ेगा फिर
we'll
कैसे
take
क्या है
few
नहीं है
questions, and if possible, I'll answer to those questions.
लंबा हाँ
माल आता है तो बंद हो जाता है माल नहीं आता तो रुक जाता है
है ये
Yes, Samir bhai, Narayan bhai.
Yeah, sure. Ravi,
समीर
Pradeep
खान
has explained everything so well in such limited time.
एक मिनट नारायण जी
Enlightened and educated. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Pradeep bhai, for the first time in 5 series webinar,
Yes.
maybe because of the crystal clear understanding, there are no questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so once again I thank you, sir.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. There could be two reasons for not having questions is that whatever I have said was so simple and could not understand or could not express the intricacies. That could be one reason, or otherwise I had really made it so simple.
Yes, the second one is the two
Pradeep bhai, I have one question.
Yes, Mr. Purohit. Yeah.
Suppose I let out my house on Airbnb,
Yes.
and the house is let out for a few days and then it's not let out for a few days. So,
Yes.
as I understand, as per your deliberation,
Yes.
that the amount will be taxable what I actually receive.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, I would feel so, subject to the condition which we have said is that your letting out is in the normal course.
Airbnb is a normal course business.
Yes, So if you are seen to be a person who has been regularly letting out
Yes.
under Airbnb scheme, then in that case, and if it is not a stray thing, once in a period of 2 years, then this could be a stray transaction. But if it is once in a period of 2 months, I would believe that it is regular. And then in that case, whatever you have received, Mr. Purohit,
Yes.
that alone would be the amount which would be considered as the annual value of the income, and no notional income would be taxed. This is a wonderful change. It's a wonderful change.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Pradeep bhai.
Ravi Bhaskar bhai is there? Ravi?
Samir bhai.
Yeah.
Samir bhai, we all are friends, perhaps family members of the federation. So we don't need an official vote of thanks. I'm happy
Sir,
to be part of it.
I'll do that. People are traveling to Mumbai. That is the only reason, sir.
Yes. No. I perfectly appreciate that, and if there are any questions, they can write to me on my email, and I'll surely respond to that,
Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Now,
Yes.
sir, finally,
Yes.
with due
अमेरिका वाले
apologies, we'll have to present a formal vote of thanks.
Yes.
And for that, since immediate past president Narayan Jain Saab is there,
Yes.
Narayan ji,
ग्रुप में है
आप एक formal vote of thanks कर लीजिए.
Formally, yes, sir.
On behalf of Pradeep Bhai, on behalf of all participants attending today, we are all grateful to you. And if Samir Bhai can consider carrying an article on the subjects which have been deliberated by learned Sri Pradeep Kabasi ji and can be carried in our website or journal, then I think the things will be clear. Because just reading the income tax bill, one cannot understand so well as has been explained by CA Pradeep Kabasi ji. So once again, sir, I express our gratitude on behalf of all the participants, and in future also I'm looking forward to listen to Pradeep Bhai. Thank you very much. And my thanks to Ganesh Bhai, Ganesh Bhai, and all other participants who have attended. Despite the fact that tomorrow we are having the National Tax Conference in Pune, and many of us are already in Pune, but still we have made it possible to attend. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My gratitude, sir.
Thank you, and good luck to all of you for the conference.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Samir bhai, I'm taking your leave.
ऑफिस
Please,
दूर होने से
please.
घर वाले को भी नहीं पता चलता ऐसा क्या हो गया ना, ये रहता था
रवि बंद कर दो
हो
अभी.
जाता है मेरे साथ कि आप ऑफिस नहीं जाते हैं इसीलिए ऐसा है, तबीयत खराब होने से रेगुलर नहीं आ पाते हैं, तो होता है कि भाई इधर देख रहे हैं कि फिर थोड़ा नहीं है, 2-3 दिन से टीटीएस का रिटर्न वगैरह वो सब कर रहा था, कहाँ है क्या है, सीनियर है सब इंटीमेट भी नहीं करता है कि नहीं आएंगे, ये है वो है। हाँ
लेट पोलिंग कर सकता है, काम ये है ना, तो लेट पोलिंग कर सकता है, उसको यहाँ कर सकता है, चाहे आपके साथ हो या मेरे साथ, अब माफी नहीं थी, बात ही नहीं रही, लेट पोलिंग कर सकता है। मकान भी था, 150 का था, वही लेट पोलिंग कर सकता है।
हाँ
वहाँ
वहाँ गैलरी में से आवाज आई जयशंकर जी, और आपने ऊपर की तरफ देखा और ऊपर से आवाज आई आई लव यू।
जब आप नरेंद्र मोदी के विदेश मंत्री होते हैं ना, तो उनका भी आप पे एक किस्म से इम्पैक्ट होता है।
पीएम का जो काम करने का तरीका है उसमें कहीं से भी तानाशाही आपको दिखती है? उनका तरीका क्या है? गलवान घाटी की घटना के बाद से लेकर अभी तक में भारत की सीमा में चीन के सैनिक नहीं घुसने, पाकिस्तान से फिर बातचीत होने की कोई स्थिति दिख रही है?
उनके साइड से ऐसी कुछ घटनाएं हुई जिसका जवाब देना।
विदेशी अखबार में दावा है कि भारतीय एजेंसीज पाकिस्तान में आतंकियों को मार रही है।
अरे यार कैसे सवाल पूछते।
दाऊद इब्राहिम को लेकर बीच में खबर चली कि मर गया है। विदेश नीति भी